directly or indirectly. For example, when I started Red Dead, I set out to watch all the classic Western movies I had yet to see during the course of playing the game. I even found myself cooking foods that were fitting in with the theme or the time period without thinking much about it. It left me thinking about the game and the time period in general on a daily basis, and something about that is making the game feel even more like an experience than Red Dead Redemption already is. So he goes on to say, for Lauren, imagine playing Alan Wake with the smell of coffee and pine trees in the room you were playing in. Call me crazy, but I would crack open a window for some cold air, make coffee, and light a pine-scented candle, or use incense and do just that. He says playing games could be accented in so many ways to become even more immersive. It's like augmenting your game to do more than it can do out of the box by way of your own creativity. So, and there's a little bit more that you guys read the rest of the comment. There's just a couple more sentences there, but I think this was a really, really interesting topic, Brent, and I want to talk about it. And I think there's a couple of things here. There's what he's talking about in terms of what you bring to the table relative to, say, other media or scents and smells or foods, and I want to talk about that. And there's also what we've talked about a little bit, which is game developers trying to augment their experience, whether it be with mobile applications or maybe a downloadable comic or a book or that sort of thing to augment the game experience. So I want to talk about that too. But I had this experience recently, personally, and somewhat coincidentally, when Dead Island came out, I happened to be watching The Walking Dead at the time and reading the Zombie Survival Guide right at the same time that Dead Island came out. And I had this couple weeks of really being sort of immersed in the world of some really wonderful worlds around zombies, and it absolutely enhanced my playing of Dead Island, and I just think that's I just thought it was so cool. And similarly with Red Dead Redemption, I was watching Westerns at the time and doing that sort of thing, and he's right, with Alan Wake I was really getting into Twin Peaks leading up to Alan Wake coming out. And it's an interesting topic, man. I don't know, do you do this? Do you do it unconsciously? Have you had this experience?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when I read his comment originally, I immediately began kind of thinking about, it's like, gee, do I do that? And I do, maybe not to the extent that he's describing, and I don't think it's something that I've necessarily done consciously, or at least until I kind of thought about it. I thought about it here. And I began to kind of, think, well, yeah, I guess I was sort of thinking like, oh, gee, well, and I'll use Red Dead as my example as well. When I was playing through Red Dead Redemption, I was, really, I was really just excited about all the kinds of different genres of Western that game has gone through. And if you are a fan of Western movies, there are sort of traditional type Westerns. There's obviously, the world famous spaghetti Westerns, and then there's also more sort of like the revisionist Western. And I felt like the thing that was so cool about Red Dead Redemption is that the game essentially went through all three genres. It sort of starts out as a traditional Western. It, like in Act 2, it kind of moves into spaghetti Western territory, and in Act 3, it becomes a revisionist Western. And so, for me, I loved, like, all the sort of, like, references directly, but also, just sort of in terms of, like, the vibe and the tone of the game to some really great Western films. And I wasn't necessarily watching them at the time because I've watched a lot of Westerns in my time, folks. But what I was doing is I was listening to a lot of Ennio Morricone, who is the composer behind like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More. Like those famous spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood,
Sergio Leone,
that were directed by Sergio Leone. And I've got to tell you guys, if you've never listened, like if you've just never like put on the soundtrack to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I mean, you just don't know how good life can be. But anyway, so at the time I was playing Red Dead, like when I was driving around in the car or whatever, that was like all I was listening to. I was just like listening to Ennio Morricone music. So I do think that there's something to what he's talking about, and I could probably think of other examples too. But that was the thing that I immediately kind of struck on. It's like, oh yeah, I guess I was kind of doing that too. And you know, when I finished Red Dead, and this is the thing that I was going to kind of say, like, it wasn't necessarily that I was watching a lot of westerns while I was playing, but when I finished playing Red Dead, I like basically like ran through like all my favorites, like, you know, Open Range and Rio Bravo, you know, Stagecoach, you know, Tombstone, you know, just, you know, went through like, you know, like this whole string of westerns that I really dug. And like for maybe a couple of weeks after, I watched a lot of westerns, and I think for me it was kind of like I hadn't quite got it out of my system yet. You know? It's like I got to the end of Red Dead and kind of wanted more, and so, you know, I it's like, all right, well, I'll just, you know, go through and start watching, you know, all these westerns I've got on my shelf. So that was kind of the place for me where I guess it kind of happened, was actually sort of in the aftermath.
Well, and you've talked about, Brent, in the past, sort of wanting this a little bit in the sense of developers putting out, and this is where I was kind of mentioning like mobile apps or some sort of other ways to interact with games when you're not actually playing the game. Now, that's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but you have expressed a desire to have some other experiences to augment your game playing experience in the past, and I think
which is exactly what he's talking about.
That's exactly right, and I think it's you know, I never thought about this consciously, this gaming by association, and I think it's a brilliant observation. There's no question. Like I said, when Alan Wake came out, leading up to that, I was watching, I was absolutely watching Twin Peaks. I was watching a ton of Stephen King. I mean, I was really sort of psyching myself up for that. Another place where I found myself sort of augmenting games is with Alan Wake, with Red Dead Redemption in particular. Bastion is another game that I've kind of done this with, is the soundtrack to the game. Some of these games that have really just incredible soundtracks. Skyrim, I'll listen to them while I'm not while I'm actually playing the game. I mean, obviously I'll listen to them in the game, but I mean not just after I've finished the game, but during the weeks and months that I'm actually playing a game, and it sort of brings the experience out into my life. But I absolutely unconsciously sort of gravitate towards like content that surrounds the game, and it absolutely enhances my experience of the game. It really puts me in that mindset. I remember I did the same thing with Heavy Rain. When Heavy Rain came out, I was really watching a lot of content that was in that same vein, that investigative sort of murder mystery type of vein, and you know, really augmented my experience there as well. Now, what I haven't done, and it's interesting that he brings it up, is something very conscious, like hanging behind smelling things in the room, putting a cup of coffee in the room, opening the window. I have to be honest, I'm intrigued by, and we've never talked about this, Brent. Cool idea. On the show, you know, our sense of smell is one of the most, if not the most powerful sense that we have. You know, everybody has an experience where you smell something, and instantly you're 7 years old again. You're right back there. And integrating smell into media experiences has been tried in the past in film.